I'm sorry, these are international drug cartels that are just totally flouting the law, operating brazenly in and around our country, and nothing's been done about it. And yet the Democrats politically putting themselves on the side of the international drug smuggling cartels. You've got to take strong action to protect our country, our communities. And if the system doesn't allow that, then the fault is with the system. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. I've got something to say about a couple of the big stories that we've all been following in the last few days. The story of the drug boats, Pete Hegseth, all of that, and this fine that the EU, the European Commission, the European Union has levied on Elon Musk and X, both absolutely vital stories that tell us something really important about what's going on in our world today, and something I've been fighting for a very long time, which is the power of bureaucracy and unaccountable decision making that we need to tackle. So we'll get to that in a second. Coming up in the show, a couple of really important conversations that I know you're going to enjoy. Susan Shelley is here to break down in detail the outrageous, scandalous story of a solar power plant in California that everyone agrees should be shut down because it's such a waste of money and it's pushing up everyone's electric bills in California. And yet the bureaucracy is conspiring to keep it open and to push up our bills, all in the name of their climate extremism. So we get to that in a second. And then Nicole Parker. Nicole, I'm sure you know from Fox News and elsewhere. She's a former FBI special agent. She's written an incredibly important book about the FBI and how it's been infected by far left ideology, not just the Trump derangement syndrome and all of the politicization that we're well aware of in relation to the 2016 election, the 2020 election and beyond, which is, out in the open. We talk about that, but actually the deeper rot within the FBI. It's a very, very important book and a really great conversation that's coming up in a second. But let's talk about these stories. Pete Hegseth, the president, taking strong action for the last few months to stop drugs from coming into America. And what you're seeing is a classic example of, well, there's two things going on that I think are really revealing. First of all, the way that politically the Democrats have jumped onto this, and yet again, with unerring accuracy, put themselves on the wrong side of an issue where the vast majority of people, of regular people, will take the side of the president and the administration, which is, I'm sorry, these are international drug cartels, massive global businesses that are just totally flouting the law, operating brazenly in and around our country, and nothing's been done about it because the system is not set up for this. And what you're seeing with the president and his team is exactly the kind of attitude that we voted for, which is to say, sorry, it's about the results and the outcomes. You've got to make things happen. And they got no patience, rightly so, for the outdated bureaucratic structures and rules and whatever that actually have failed and have led to things like this happening. This massive amounts of drugs flooding in to the country, and it's got worse and worse in recent years, of course, because of fentanyl, where you need tiny amounts to cause massive death and destruction. Just specks of it can kill. And so this is a really important, and people make the argument, oh, well, the drug boats are mainly cocaine and not fentanyl. Well, how do you know? There's intelligence behind this. They're not doing it for fun. They're doing it because they want to save lives in America. And yet the Democrats politically are putting themselves on the side of the international drug smuggling cartels, just as during the Biden years, they put themselves on the side of the international people smuggling cartels. And it's just incredible to me that they hate Trump so much that they'll just put themselves in these absurd positions where they look completely ridiculous and massively out of touch with what normal people want, which is their communities and their families and their friends to be safe. Okay. And of course, I'll just say at this point, it's not just about the supply of drugs coming in from outside the country. Of course, it's true that if we want to deal with these problems, we have to address the demand for drugs and addiction, and all of that's true. but it's not one or the other. You've got to do both. And for too long, the administrations in this country have done nothing effective about the smuggling. And as with everything else, it's the power of deterrence and that idea of showing making a strong, taking strong action that that's consistent, not just a one-off. That's why it has to be followed up. That's why if you do one strike, it's not enough. You've got to keep going so that they get until they get the point that you're not going to get away with this anymore. And so that's what's going on here, obviously, and the vast majority of people support it. But what you're seeing now is this just the system, the bureaucratic system, just rising up and saying, "Oh well, Congress, people in Congress, well, we didn't approve this, and we didn't, sign off on this, and what about the rules of war and the law of war, and are they enemy combatants, and they're not really. It's not a state actor, it's not a government, it's not a war because it's not another country." That's also outdated when in the era of these cartels and gangs that operate as effectively as country. They have their own armies. I mean, look, I've seen it firsthand. Many years ago, I actually worked on an election campaign in Colombia, and I saw the militarization there of the drug cartels. They act like a state, and so what the system that is set up is just not geared towards this, and it's a classic example of government bureaucracy that is not fit for purpose, and what people want is results and action. I don't care about all this. And so, of course, we'll see it, wind its way through the system. There are hearings in Congress, and I don't know where it's going to end up. But in the meantime, it is very clear to me that you've got to take strong action to protect people, our country, our communities, and if the system doesn't allow that then the fault is with the system, not with the people trying to get good outcomes for the American people. Now let's look at the EU, where you've got another situation where the bureaucracy is just totally out of control and asserting its power, totally devoid of any kind of political accountability. And the rules are there. It seems not to protect people or to make any good outcome happen, but just to allow the bureaucracy to do whatever it wants to do. And so you've seen this insane situation where the EU has fined Elon Musk for flouting some ridiculous regulation to do with the check mark system. Is the check mark system that Elon Musk's new X compared to the previous system under Twitter isn't deceiving people because it gives the idea that they're verified even though they're not they're not pretending it's verified. He changed the system. It's a new policy. Basically, the check mark on Twitter is no longer. He was very clear about it. This is not for verification. This gives you access to different features and services. It's like a premium membership, if you like. And so it's like, and the EU is just saying, well, sorry, just totally ignoring that and just applying this fine purely out of vindictiveness, purely because they hate Elon Musk. And of course, now he's gone on a tirade against the European Union, quite rightly, because the European Union is completely unaccountable. Again, you've got the bureaucratic force that totally overwhelms any kind of democratic control or accountability. And earlier, when I was sort of setting up this story, I used those terms, two terms, European Union, European Commission. And it's very important we understand the difference between them, because a lot of people say, what are you talking about? A lot of people who don't understand here in America, I hear them say, well, the EU, the European Union, is democratic because you've got a European Parliament that's directly elected. And you've got all the governments who are making the decisions, and they're directly elected, the prime ministers and so on. That's true. But you have to understand how decisions are actually made, how policy decisions are made in the EU. There are three parts to the EU. That's the structure. Just in this, just as we have three parts to our constitutional setup in America, you've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. In the EU, there are three parts to it: the European Commission, which is the Brussels bureaucracy, which is appointed, it's not elected; the European Parliament, which is elected, directly elected by people from the member states; and there's something called the European Council, which is the um, political leaders of all the member states who are also directly elected. And so those are the three things: the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council. And people will point out that two of those three, the European Council and the European Parliament, are directly elected, and therefore it's all fine. But here's the important point to understand. Guess where the power to initiate policy comes from in the EU? It's not the Council, it's not the Parliament, it's the Commission. Anything that happens in terms of policy or decision making, whatever, it starts with the European Commission. They have the sole power to initiate anything. And so that's why it all drives in this insane bureaucratic direction, totally free of any political or democratic accountability, because they have the power to initiate everything. And the bigger that the EU has got, the more the rules have had to be adapted to make sure that that power is even less constrained than it ever was. In the days where you had, 6 or 7 members, in the early days of the EU, they could all get round a table and vote, and you had a bit of accountability that way. Now, with this sprawling organization, 20 plus, I can't remember how many they've got now. Is it up to 30? I don't know, because he won less since Brexit. They have this thing called qualified majority voting, which means that instead of one country having one vote on all these decisions, you have weighted votes for different countries with different populations. It's all just horse trading. And basically what happens is that no country can basically stop anything. The veto has been completely eroded. And so that has massively strengthened the bureaucracy, because they can just push it all through. Because as we will hear later on in our conversation with Susan Shelley about a solar plant here in California, the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats, the paper pushers, the people inside, they're the ones that really understand how to work the system. And that's why you end up with these outrageous decisions just popping up out of nowhere to fine a social media company they don't like, because X is now a home of free speech. And of course, they don't want that, because Elon Musk personally, and many people on X more broadly, constantly criticize the EU. They don't like it. And so now they're trying to punish him. And it's a classic example of an out of control bureaucracy. And you're seeing it everywhere. And it's a central defining issue for all of us to make sure we are aware of how where power lies that affects the things that actually touch our lives, and how the people we elect, unless they really understand how to get to grips with these bureaucracies, nothing will ever change. Joining us now, Susan Shelley, with a couple of great stories getting into the details of what is going on and what we need to pay attention to. Let's start with this ridiculous story of the solar plant. Many of us have seen it, Ivanpah, because you can drive right past it. Was it once touted as the world's biggest reflective solar? What do they call it? This is the one where you've got all solar panels in a circle and they're reflecting off some big thing in the middle, and it heats up water. I mean, the whole thing is just a classic example of the solar and wind boondoggle, but it's all ended in disaster. What's happening, Susan?
Well, this is one of the outcomes of the big Great Recession crash, because when the government started bailing out the banks and then tried to bail out everybody else,
So it's
right after
2008, 2009.
this is 2008, 2009,
Yeah.
when President Barack Obama was sworn in. A couple of months later, he approved this deal. And let's look for shovel-ready projects, $787 billion in total, and they're just shoveling the money out the door. And one of the products of this was this Ivanpah thermal solar. It's not photovoltaic solar, it's thermal solar plant. It looks like 3 giant alien amphitheaters, big circles of mirrors that reflect the sun and point it at a tower and boil water, and the water creates steam, and the steam turns the turbines, and the turbines create electricity. The trouble was the sun goes down. This is the trouble with many of the solar plans that they have in California, is they never take into account that the sun goes down. They just subsidize and carbon credit trade, and everybody makes money, and the sun goes down and the thing doesn't work. $1.6 billion federal taxpayer loan guarantees on this, and another $600 million of green tax credits, and they build the thing. And immediately in the first year, they get tagged by the California Air Resources Board for carbon dioxide emissions. Now, how does a solar plant have exactly? It seems that they were double the level that triggers participation in the cap and trade program, which is supposed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Well, how is this? Because they had a natural gas boiler to keep the water hot at night and
Oh
when there
my
were clouds
goodness.
overhead. So the thing is a hybrid plant. It's on federal land where there's an endangered desert tortoise. It wasn't endangered when they started this. It was only threatened. Now it's endangered.
So
And
this is
so,
land, it's just on the way from LA to Vegas, isn't it? Off
right.
the highway there, yeah.
Right. So this was a ridiculous bailout program to start with. They should never have built it. Having built it, now we have these mandates in California law for all of the utilities to buy a certain percentage of the electricity they sell from renewable sources, which are defined in law as solar and wind and a few other things, but not nuclear and not hydroelectric. Now, how is hydroelectric not renewable? Of course it's renewable. They were looking for ways to forcibly subsidize. They put it in law that the utilities had to sign long-term contracts. So PG&E has contracts that go to 2039, and this is much more expensive from this plant than from newer photovoltaic solar plants. PG&E wanted out. They negotiated an end to the contract called a contract termination agreement. They negotiated that with the owners of the plant. And that was announced in January, but it was pending approval by the California Public Utilities Commission. Well, last week, the CPUC finally got around to it, and they took their staff's recommendation and they put it on the consent calendar and they breezed it through by the numbers. And if you were watching the hearing, as I was, you wouldn't even know which one it was. They had no debate or discussion at all, up or down, on the consent calendar in a big group of other measures, as if it was nothing. Here's what they did. They forced it to stay open. They rejected the contract termination agreements, even though the owner wanted it, the customer wanted it, the Biden administration approved it, the Trump administration approved it. Everybody's in agreement, but the staff of the California Regulatory Agency didn't like this. They were worried that there wouldn't be enough solar energy because maybe the Trump administration wouldn't approve any new projects. And if this one closed, then maybe that would make it too hard to meet this arbitrary, pointless standard to hit a certain target of greenhouse gas reduction by a certain date. And the upshot for customers is that your electricity rates would have been less, and now they're going to be more through 2039, unless they negotiate some new deal where the right people get whatever it is they want. And so this is an example of how arbitrary, stupid laws, idiotic laws, are forcing prices in California to be higher. Because electricity, the price of electricity is in the price of everything you buy. If a supermarket's running refrigerator cases, you're paying more in California than you are in other states. This is why. And the lesson here is the regulatory agency staff has more power than the Federal Department of Energy of both administrations, both parties.
It's an amazing story. You laid it out so clearly and perfectly. Um, just one thing. I mean, many questions, but let's just start here, just for clarification. The PG&E contract, was that the main contract? Was it the only contract? Was it the PG&E contract that was keeping this thing open? Because I remember the announcement in January was that it was going to close, not
Right.
just the whole plant was going to close, not just that one contract. Is that because the PG&E thing was the main contract?
It was one of several, or two of several. There are three different facilities, and I think Southern California Edison has a contract with one, and PG&E has a contract with two, and I think there's a third company I think San Diego Gas and Electric has some of it. And they were all going to negotiate contract termination agreements, but PG&E went first, and they negotiated the whole thing. It was announced in January that the thing was going to close.
Because of the PG&E first move thing.
Right. They had the first negotiated contract termination. They were going to pay a big charge to get out of it, but that was going to work out gradually to be less than the cost of keeping it through 2039. The maintenance costs are very high for these mirrors that reflect the sun and fry the birds. And
So in the dying days, really, of the Biden administration, they said it was okay.
they said it was okay.
And then the Trump administration came in and said, we agree, it's okay.
Right.
Right. The California Public a couple of things there for those of us who don't follow it as closely as you do. What is the consent calendar?
The consent calendar, this is common to all government panels that I've ever seen. It's when they all agree that something is fine and it just needs the approval of the Board of Supervisors, the City Council, the CPUC, whichever agency is in charge of approving things. Now, as a voter, you would think, well, they debate it, they discuss it, and then they vote on it, and it's all public because these are public meetings, right? Well, not exactly. There's a long regulatory process where there is public comment for the staff. And the public comment is somewhere on the website. You can find the letters. If you're a company that's affected by one of these crazy regulatory changes, like for instance, the one that said all the trucks have to be electric by a date certain in California, people wrote in from big companies and said this is not workable. So where are those comments? Well, it's in the public comment for a particular meeting during this 2 or 3 year regulatory process. It's not very public for the public. It's public for the people who are involved and know where to look for these things, the lawyers, the lobbyists. And then when at the very end, when the staff makes its recommendation, disregarding all the public comment that was critical of what they were going to do anyway, they make their recommendation. That's in some document, that's in some agenda packet that's on the website, if you can find it. I looked for like 3 hours to find this. And then all of these different recommendations together are on the consent calendar. And they say, well, now take up items 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. We're going to pull off 2 and 12 and do those at our next meeting. But we're going to do 1, 5, 7. And then they vote up or down in 2 seconds. On to the next thing.
And so the consent calendar is really there for waving things through.
Right. When you hear politicians talk about it, you would think, well, there's public debate. This is when the appointees of the elected officials who are supposed to answer to the voters, this is when they really look hard at what the staff has done. They don't look at all at what the staff has done. They wave it right through.
So the reason that this will make prices high is this a big proportion of the electricity that PG&E buys in order to provide to us?
Well, it's a percentage. I don't know how much it's
But
going to
enough to
affect the
put
rates.
prices up.
Enough that PG&E put out a statement saying that this is going to mean that California customers of PG&E will be paying higher rates when they could have been paying lower rates.
And it's the California Public Utilities Commission.
Correct.
So I know as governor, I will have some say over this. One of the pieces of work that I'm doing right now is going into, as a candidate now, switching from podcast host to candidate, is going through each of these agencies and being incredibly precise about exactly what the powers are of the governor in terms of appointments. And they're all different. You've got to really be precise. Some of them, the governor, like the State Board of Education, you appoint all of them. Coastal Commission, it's 4 out of 12. CARB, it's a majority, but they're staggered appointments. So we're looking at how we can, make some changes there quicker than that, etc. So California Public Utilities Commission, we'll get into that one and see what we can do about the committee. But the commission, so it's a meeting of the commissioners. This was
Right.
okay,
Mhm.
And
And I
they
think
just
I think
waved
they
it
meet
through,
every 2 weeks. I'm
and
not sure.
they waved it through on the recommendation of the staff.
Right. Do you
Okay,
remember the desalination plant that was going to be built? And it was
Orange County.
right. It was the staff of the Coastal Commission when everyone was in agreement and all the mitigation measures over years had been made and agreed to. It was the staff of the Coastal Commission at the last moment that made a recommendation to reject that project.
Yeah, well, this is a really important point, just broadly, which is that in terms of my power as governor and my, I worked inside of a government and I understand this very, very, in great detail because I experienced it when I was trying to get rid of regulations and make change happen as the senior advisor to the Prime Minister in the UK. That actually, this is how it works, and this is why you've got to really understand how the bureaucracy works in order to make a difference, and you've got to be incredibly aggressive. And in the end, my conclusion back in the day in the UK was the only way you make progress is to fire all these people, like really fire them and reduce their number because they overwhelm the ability for any kind of public, or political accountability or political leadership, because they're there the whole time. They're really good at the process. They are, just as you've described. This is a really important story, and I'm so happy that you laid it out like this, because this is what goes on in everything to do with government and regulation, where you've got this incredibly sprawling bureaucracies, and there are just more of them than, way more than the people who are supposed to be exercising policy and political leadership. And so that's what we have to understand if we're actually going to make change happen in California.
Yes, the California Air Resources Board is another one, the South Coast Air Quality Management District. The staff of these organizations, these agencies, is incredibly powerful. And the people who are appointed to be in charge of the staff don't know anything, and they're just waving this stuff through. And
Exactly, and
it's
it's a
very
really
frustrating.
important. Exactly, we've heard this story many, many times. I mean, but by the way, this is kind of, I mean, another example very relevant to this year's politics was the Citizens Redistricting Commission. Which is why everyone said, "Oh, we have an independent redistricting commission in California." No, we don't. This because the staff and the control of the process was hijacked by Democrats, and so even before we get the results of Prop 50 implemented and other 5 Republican seats stolen, the process had already been hijacked. So you had already a massive imbalance. 40% of the vote for Republicans, 17% of the congressional seats, less than half what fair representation would mean. That was entire, and people point to the commission and say, well, you had equal representation of Democrats and Republicans on the commission. That's true, but actually they're not the ones who drew the maps. The maps were drawn by the staff, and the staff was controlled by the Democrats because they understand how this stuff works typically better than Republicans. And so we've got to really be better at them at this game. It's a very, very important educational moment, the way you've just laid this all out, Susan. I've got a couple more questions. Um, the specific requirement for a proportion of solar power, is that emanating from the repeated renewal of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is the one that says we have to reach, I mean, the original was 2006, wasn't it? Like, however, a proportion of
40% below
1990, I can't remember what it
1990 or
is,
something. Yeah.
1990. And then they keep renewing, and they just renewed it this year. We've talked about it on a previous show. Rename it the cap and trade system. It's all connected, isn't it? Is
Right,
that
it
what's
is. The,
driving
the
this?
the cap and trade, now called cap and invest, now renewed through, it was going to expire and now it's renewed, I think, to 2045. That is the California Air Resources Board's system of enforcing what the legislature asked it to do. So in a way, it's not their fault. I mean, you can argue with the process, but they're not the ones who insisted on reducing greenhouse gases by arbitrary numbers, by arbitrary dates. That was the legislature. I think the most recent bill that they passed was SB 100, which I think came from Kevin DeLeon when he was in the Senate. And it probably came from Tom Steyer because he was funding all of these campaigns to do all of these green mandates. And the latest that we have is we're supposed to be 100% carbon free by 2045. So that's 20 years from now.
That's what
And
they
in the
call net
meantime,
zero. Yeah.
right. And the meantime, what they define as renewable is solar and wind, and I think geothermal, and a few things that probably haven't been fully developed yet. Hydroelectric doesn't count. Nuclear doesn't count. We all want clean energy, everybody, but we have to have enough of it. And sadly, what these agencies are doing is they're working on what they call demand response, because they say, well, you don't have to build another power plant for when everyone's got the air conditioning on, because you can do demand response. Well, what's that? That means they sign people up to have their electricity turned off on a hot day.
Yeah. No air conditioning in the summer. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, people will die as a result of demand response, shutting off the electricity. This is craziness.
It's insane, and it's I mean, it just goes to the heart of this climate ideology insanity that's really at the heart of so many of the problems we have in California. The thing that the reason everything's so expensive. I mean, you and I have talked about this many times, and I had the great joy of being on stage with Tom Steyer on Friday at a candidate forum where I just said, he's going on about affordability. I said, well, yes, we have the highest gas prices in the country because of the Tom Steyer climate extremism. We have the highest electric bills in the country, apart from Hawaii, because of the Tom Steyer climate extremism, the highest housing costs because of the Tom Steyer climate extremism. All these things that he's pushed for so long, the exact reason that we've got the highest cost for all these things in the country. I think we should do a whole special on this, Susan. It's incredibly important. There's so many different aspects to this, actually. I think it's really, really important to dig into it, and the way that this central idea of net zero 2045 is driving so many of these negative and harmful consequences for California individuals and families and businesses. It's really important we understand all the ramifications, and no one does. And I think that the politicians just don't. And Newsom just, oh, fantastic, we're going to be climate warriors. And in the meantime, people are paying the price. It's just outrageous. But dismantling it is going to be very, very complicated
Very
because it's
complicated.
embedded into so many laws and
Yes.
regulations and so on. But we've
And
got to
there's
do
so
it.
much money. There's
Yeah.
so many grifters making money off of
Oh,
these
the people who are
carbon,
getting subsidies
right, the
and
subsidies and the
mandates.
carbon markets and the rest of it. It's all made up out of the air, and then people can buy and sell. Essentially, they can buy and sell monopoly cards. Where does that money come from? Higher rates, higher prices, higher taxes.
All right, time for a second story quickly, Susan. Okay, you go for it. Lay it out, and we'll get into it.
Okay, well, we've been following this story about the fraud in Minnesota, and as you've pointed out, California is going to probably make that look insignificant. And the details of the fraud in Minnesota that were busted in 2022. What happened there is the Federal Child Nutrition Program, administered by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, sends money to the states. The states give the money to nonprofits. The nonprofits give the money to vendors, and the idea is to feed children who are in the school lunch program at times when they're not in school. Well, during COVID, this just exploded because no one was in school. So all of the safeguards were dropped. And the result was that this one fraudulent outfit called Feeding Our Future, they had been in 2019 getting $3.4 million for the program. In 2021, $200 million. And there were dozens of people indicted and convicted for this because the money they were making fraudulent people. They were fraudulent children. They were fabricating people who were having these meals. There were no meals. It was just the money and the kickbacks and the money and the kickbacks and fake paperwork. And that's very instructive for California because that's how it's done. You need names, you need bodies, then you don't have to give them anything. You just file the paperwork and collect the millions and billions of dollars. That's where we have to look in California. It's also in housing. It's in healthcare.
Yeah.
In Minnesota right now, there's this program where people were being diagnosed with autism in order to get the health benefits and the money and whatever, and they weren't really autistic. This is terrible that they were doing this, and all fraud. So what are we doing in California? We have millions and millions of people who are on the Medi-Cal program, Medicaid in the rest of the country, Medi-Cal it's called here. Are they all real? Are they signed up? Is there money coming from the federal government for policies and people that don't really exist? All the volume in California is immense, and the opportunity for fraud is tremendous.
And the point that I make, and I'll just have to, just 2 points. Number one is you can assume it's far worse because you've had far more time in California, far longer, where you've had this one-party rule, which is what breeds this kind of complacency and entitlement and total lack of oversight and total lack of any kind of sense that there'll be any accountability. And that's what leads to the kind of corruption. They think we're going to get away with it because it's going to go on like this forever. No one's ever going to come looking. And in Minnesota, it's been a few years where you've had one-party rule by Democrats. In California, it's like 5 times as long. And so you can assume it's much worse. And then the second point is that when you look at the nature of what's been going on, we've got, these things that you've talked about, they're not even the things we know about. We know about the EDD fraud in California during the pandemic. That was the employment department. We know about the homelessness money because that was the state order. So it's 55 billion on EDD that was lost. Then you had 24 billion the state auditor said on homelessness. Then you have the 13 slightly different category of the same point, which is taxpayer money that shouldn't be being spent. 13 billion next year on free healthcare for illegal immigrants. I mean, that's nearly 100 billion right there. Just what we know about. That doesn't even get into any of these other areas the food stamps area or disability. I mean, it's just, the idea that this is not much worse in California is a total joke. The question for you, Susan, is how did the Minnesota thing come to light? Was it whistleblowers and that led to the investigation from federal prosecutors?
It probably was. I'm not sure how the 2022 fraud was uncovered, but most recently there have been whistleblowers on these programs. It's outrageous.
That's the point that I was really focused on last week because it seemed to me that they played a very important role in Minnesota, and they for years were being silenced and intimidated by Tim Walz and the Democrat machine. And we're really trying to bring this to people's attention. There are letters that we can now read that were these whistleblowers were trying to tell everyone. And so my argument last week was let's not let that happen in California. So I set up a tip line, califraud.com, for anyone who works in state government or has anything to do with these programs in California to tell us what's going on so that when I'm governor, I can really, get stuck in and stop all this because the basic point is this is theft of taxpayer money on a massive scale. We already have the highest taxes in the country, and we keep being told we need more. I mean, this is one of the most laughable things I heard at that debate, not really debate, it was a candidate forum on Friday, was the guy next to me, Tony Thurman, running for governor, the current superintendent of public instruction, at one point said, "Oh, we have a revenue problem in California. We don't have enough money." What are you talking about? We have the highest taxes in the country. They've doubled the budget in the last 10 years. They've nearly doubled it in the last 5 years. In just before the pandemic, it was $180 billion state budget. Now it's 325 or something. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And everything gets worse. The results and the outcomes are worse. The worst in the country on everything. So the idea that we just take more money and spend it, there's something deeply wrong, and we've got to address it.
Yes, and on homelessness, that's a really good thing to study because the way they do it is similar to this federal program from the USDA. They give the money to nonprofits. The federal government's giving the money to states. So in homelessness, California is giving the money to nonprofits. The nonprofits are giving, it's impossible to trace anything. There's
And
no
that's what we call the homeless
accountability.
industrial complex, and
Right.
they're all connected, and it's all corrupt, and we got to bring a stop to it. But we need the information first, and that's why you're brilliant, Susan. You give us all of that every time. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Steve.
Great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Joining us now, as I said at the top of the show, for a really important conversation is my friend Nicole Parker, Fox News contributor, but the author, more importantly, of a fantastic new book, The Two FBIs. So, Nicole, it's so great to see you. We see each other on Fox and at the studios from time to time, but I'm so happy you've written this book. It's incredibly important people understand what's going on. So, tell us the story. What's the sort of main, reason you wrote it and what you're trying to get across here?
All right. So first of all, I think it's important to understand what actually led me to the FBI in the first place. I was a witness to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York City on September 11th of 2001. It was absolutely horrifying and tragic. Obviously, not just for myself, not just for our whole country, but for the whole world. And it left a very lasting impression on me. I was only 23 years old on that horrific day. And when I was watching people jump to their deaths, I knew that this was evil. I was seeing the battle between good and evil right before my face. And I knew that one day I would go back and serve my country. I did not know in what capacity I would do that, but I really felt strongly about that. I detail it in my book. I had a spiritual experience that morning, and it was the first responders, it was NYPD, it was the firefighters, it was those amazing heroes who saved thousands of lives that morning. So fast forward, I'm living, in New York City. I end up moving to Los Angeles. I continue to work in finance. I worked in prime brokerage. I worked at a hedge fund, and I was doing very well. And I was very blessed and I was very grateful. But that wasn't really what I felt my calling was. And I felt like I really did want to do something to give back and serve others and to serve our country. And it was through the recommendation of a friend that I'd worked with on Wall Street. And he said, Nicole, have you ever thought about applying to the FBI? And I said, no, absolutely. I've never thought of it. I love law enforcement. I love the military, but I don't come from that sort of background or family. And he said, maybe you should apply. And that's what I did. I went back from New York back to Los Angeles. I went to FBI.gov and I started going through the application process to become an FBI special agent.
Amazing.
So, yeah, not your typical path. Most FBI agents dream of being in the FBI since they were born.
Right.
For me, it wasn't that, but I still embraced the opportunity, and I go through it in my book. I detail the application process, the Quantico training. I mean, it was brutal. It was
When did you
intense.
start?
I started in 2010.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I get to FBI Miami. I'm assigned to the Miami division. I start off in the white collar division. Obviously, I had a financial background working securities fraud. It was a very natural fit for me. And I learned a lot. I learned how to conduct investigations, all of the things that you do as an FBI agent. And then eventually, around 2015, I transferred over to the violent crime unit and the violent crime squad, which was intense. It was heavy, it was evil, it was dark. We were seeing the worst of humanity. But I truly felt that I was making a difference. I felt that I was serving the people like I had committed to do. I was upholding the Constitution in a fair and unbiased manner. And all I wanted to do was put bad criminals behind bars. That was it. And it was around, I would say, exactly the date of July 5th of 2016 when James Comey came out to the world and in this press conference that was completely unprecedented, he said, he lays out basically the indictment of Hillary Clinton in so many terms. And then he comes out and says, but no reasonable prosecutor would charge Hillary Clinton. And we were stunned. We're like, how can he be saying this? Absolutely, a reasonable prosecutor would charge Hillary Clinton based on the information that you just read. She violated the law. But it was a very defining moment because we all realized internally at the FBI that there really were two systems of justice. The FBI at that moment, I thought, had become politically weaponized. And it was rules for thee, but not for me. And we were really disappointed if there's so many terms that come to my mind, but we were highly disappointed because we're like, this is not what we signed up for. So again, I'm down in FBI Miami working violent crime, doing my thing, trying to just stay out of that. I wasn't up in Washington field office. I wasn't up at headquarters. I was trying to ignore it. And many of us were trying to ignore it, but it got so overwhelmingly loud, it became impossible to ignore. And I came to the realization that there were two FBIs. And it was almost like an internal civil war between FBI one, the good agents and staff trying to do the right thing for the right reason. They want nothing to do with politics. Lady Justice should be blind. We just want to protect Americans. Versus FBI 2. These are the law enforcement, power hungry individuals who wanted to use their power to push their own political and social agendas. So basically, they were using the FBI as a vehicle to push what they wanted to have happen in the world. And it really centered a lot around politics and social justice movements. And internally, it was a constant push and pull. It was like a tug of war. It was unrecognizable to me what the agency became. And so with time, we get through 2016, James Comey ends up getting fired in 2017. Christopher Wray comes in. We're thinking, okay, well, maybe he's better. And I'll tell you internally, we were sick and tired of having these DOJ guys come in that had never had the gun, the badge, or the credentials from Quantico. They'd never worked in operations plan. They'd never done anything. These were all DOJ guys. They all knew knew. They had their little friends in the system, and that was very obvious. They got protective cover from their own people. And so it got worse and worse with time. Then Joe Biden comes in. It went completely off the rails. The January 6th misdemeanor obsession at the FBI, it was too much. It was over the top. I don't care who you supported in the presidential election. It doesn't even matter. It shouldn't matter as an FBI agent. But all of a sudden, it did. And they were using the FBI's resources full throttle to go after Trump supporters, those that allegedly committed misdemeanor offenses, which the FBI has never been in the business of doing. We don't have enough FBI agents in the world to work misdemeanors. We don't have time for that. But that's what their obsession was. And for me, the breaking point was when my best friend in the FBI was shot and killed in the line of duty, taking down a child predator for a search warrant. There was no SWAT protection for Special Agent Laura Schwarzenberger or Special Agent Daniel Alphen or the four other agents that were wounded that morning. But yet they were liberally sending SWAT resources nationwide in the same time frame for January 6th misdemeanors, nonviolent offenders. Imagine how that would make you feel.
Wow.
It was disgusting, it was despicable, and most Americans don't know about that. So when you
No.
ask me what led you to write this book, it's a combination of all of the things that I just kind of summarized for you, and there's a lot more in there. It's a very faith-based book, but that's really what it was. No one was willing to stand up and say, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this. I personally walked away from my pension. I walked away from my hard earned position that I earned through Quantico, but I truly prayed and I felt that God had a different path for me. And that is why I left. And God opened the door to get this book deal. I give all the credit to Him. And that is why I'm here today.
Amazing story, Nicole. I have so many questions, but in terms of the what just the basics timeline, when did you leave?
I left the end of 2022. So 2 years into the Biden administration.
And we've seen you making such great arguments and really telling people what's going on Fox for a while now. Um, but this is a different level. Wow. I've got there's a sort of broad thing that I want to start with, which is before what you just said, I suppose, I've been very fired up about the FBI politicization, a strong critic of Christopher Wray. When I was doing my show, I went on and on about it. It's been in particular the the role of Christopher Wray in that whole process of what we saw going on in the 2020 election in terms of the silence and in particular the Hunter Biden misinformation thing and that led to the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, all of that stuff, right? So I've been all over Christopher Wray on that. And I guess my real question is very interesting as you're going through the timeline there. In my mind, the FBI corruption and politicization story is really focused on Trump and things associated with Trump. But it's interesting, and I know it is. I mean, that's a big part of it. But the first thing you mentioned was actually social justice movements, and
Yep.
so I'm interested in that. Are you saying that this was actually it kind of preceded Trump, actually?
Yes. Look, I respect everyone that has their opinion about the FBI, and everyone's allowed to have that. But someone that actually lived and breathed it and saw it and witnessed it and had to endure it, I have a completely different perspective. And I think that's what makes my book very unique. And it's very fair. It's very fair. Like I call it like it is. And if people don't like what I'm saying, then maybe you shouldn't behave like that at the FBI because all I do is speak the truth. So really, I noticed even under Obama, because I came in under the Obama administration. Okay. I was under Obama, Trump, and Biden. And again, I'm coming from the private sector. And this is, way before all the woke stuff in 2020. And I will never forget a moment when they said, everyone in the FBI, you have to do this implicit bias training. I'm like, excuse me, what is that? And what they were basically saying is that we were all born to have implicit bias and that we are unable to do our investigations in a fair and impartial manner based on someone's potential race or gender or things of that sort. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And I will never forget because I was on the violent crime squad. I remember exactly where I was sitting when the email came out and it said, this is mandatory training. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Don't tell me who I have never, ever been a participant in that. I have never even witnessed it at the FBI. I never witnessed it once, not on my squad, not on any of the operations. But that was some of the social justice stuff that started. Then Trump comes in, and I have to give it to Trump. He did the best he could in his first administration, but he wasn't an insider into the DC Beltway. He didn't, he was just learning the ropes as how many snakes there really were. And again, regardless of whether you support President Trump or not, it is not right what the FBI was doing. And so then Trump tried to clean up as many things as he could, but he had things going against him. He took the recommendation of Governor Chris Christie from New Jersey to even take Christopher Wray as the FBI director. And so I can't fault him because he did the best that he could with the knowledge that he had, but that was a very poor selection, in my opinion, because Christopher Wray was just as damaging to the FBI as James Comey, if that's possible. I still think James Comey is the absolute worst. But Christopher Wray did no favors for the Bureau either. But they came in and they made diversity a pillar of the FBI. And it was such an obsession. And there ended up being almost 20 social justice warrior clubs or groups at the agency. Look, until every single investigation and every single file at the FBI has been solved, how do you have time to be using taxpayer dollars to solve, to go to these clubs and to these groups? That's not why I came to the FBI. I did not come to be a social justice warrior. I came to put people behind bars. If you want to do that, that's totally fine, but you need to do that in your own time and not on taxpayer dollars. And what I think was really disturbing, I mentioned to you that my best friend was killed. They didn't tell us what happened after she and Dan were murdered in the line of duty. There was no after action review from Christopher Wray at the top. We didn't even get an after action review in FBI Miami. It was in my division. We hadn't had an adversarial death in 14 years. Okay. And we had two. But you know what I did get? I got a regular flow of diversity emails into my email box at the FBI every week. I started printing them off. It was so much. I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm not even going to print this. This is so absurd and ridiculous. I said, you know what? And I talk about it in my book. I had a supervisor and he said, Nicole, I'm checking with you to see how you're doing. I know that you're struggling with the loss of your friend, and I know it's really sad and difficult. And I appreciated that show of sympathy. I said, with all due respect, you're not going to like what I'm going to say, but until you tell me what's happened, I don't want any sympathy. Will you please tell them to stop sending us these diversity emails and these social justice club emails and start sending us emails and telling us what happened to our agents that were killed in the line of duty protecting children? That's a problem for me. It overtook the mission of the Bureau, in my opinion. They dropped their hiring standards. It was an obsessive thing. Thank goodness President Trump has come in his second administration and says, no more, no
Yeah,
more.
rooting it out. So let's just think about where that came from, all of that, because when was Comey appointed?
Comey came in, and remember that Mueller actually extended. Normally, you get a 10-year appointment.
10 years. Yeah.
He had an extension on his appointment. So I'm trying to remember the exact year that Comey came in, but it was probably I'd have to look the exact date.
I
But
know
he
it was
was in there
Obama.
for
Yeah.
yeah, he was in there for a few years. He came in under Obama.
Yeah.
And again, initially when he came in, we were thinking, oh, he seems like he's going to be pretty cool. Like he seemed like a moral person, and he was very self-righteous and very like, I'm a very good person, and we believed him for a while. But then after that July 5th of 2016 speech, we're like, no, like
So it's
you're
interesting.
not
So
telling us
I'm
the
just
truth.
trying to understand how an organization gets infected by this stuff. What is the process of infection, right? Because that's really what's happened here. And I'm wondering whether it was, around this time, and it was everywhere, and now that's being documented. You see it in the private sector of people who've been, Vivek Ramaswamy's book Woke Inc. Was one of the first to document this in the in the financial world and through ESG and all of that. And now here in the FBI, so what do you think is the mechanism? Is it something like Comey comes in and he's at the start of all this, and is he told, you've now got to hire these diversity people and whatever, and then he hires people, and then they're given a budget and an office, and and then they start pushing this crap out, and Comey's too weak to stop it because no one wants to look like they're standing up to this shit?
Right. Or maybe Comey agreed with it.
Yeah, agreed, exactly. Or which is it? Or is it that he was kind of pushing it?
Well, and again, let's make this clear. FBI 2, which again, FBI 1 are the stalwart, amazing people that work at the FBI, and there are many of them, and they are our true heroes. Just like my friend Laura, she was an incredible FBI agent, and there are many like her. I work shoulder to shoulder with patriotic warriors at the FBI. They do exist. FBI 2, on the other hand, like I said, are the opposite of FBI 1. And FBI 2, people always think it's just the director, or it's just the seventh floor, or it's just the people in DC. That's not true. And as someone who worked there, FBI 2 is infiltrated from the top all the way down to the bottom. It goes from the director to the seventh floor. This is, previously when I left.
Is that the Hoover Building, the seventh
Yeah,
floor
yeah, sorry,
in
yeah.
DC?
The
Yeah.
Hoover what was to the Hoover building, right. Kash Patel is saying we can't have agents or work there anymore because it's not a safe building. But anyway, people think it was just the top. It wasn't the top. It infiltrates from the top and trickles down to the bottom. So we're talking people in our human resources division, HRD, people that are extremely woke, people that have never been in law enforcement, never been agents, and all of a sudden they're making these decisions about the FBI. They were given an extremely large amount of power. We're talking about support staff members, things like the Catholic memo, things that, you've got support staff members that are just taking their own personal opinions and intel analysts and packaging it up and saying that it's intel and putting a stamp of intel on it and then internally distributing that. That's not intelligence. That's your own personal views. Some of them are extremely woke, extremely liberal. And again, I don't care how woke you are. I don't care how liberal you are. I don't care how conservative or I really don't care. You can have all the views in the world you want. But the moment you step foot into the FBI office and you are doing your job, you must put your own opinions aside. And so that's the problem. A lot of people were not doing that. And what is so incredible is that people think that the FBI were just going after conservatives outside the agency. No, they were going after their own conservative employees as well. The COVID vaccine was a defining moment. The George Floyd was a very defining moment at the FBI. Things started to go off the rails, and people think, oh, they were just coming after. Trust me, if you were internal and you were a conservative, you had a target on your back as well. If you ever stood up to it, you had a target on your back or you felt that you did. And many people were reprimanded and actually demoted from positions. I'm sure many Americans remember this. I definitely remember it, but it was June 4th of 2020. We called them Neil Team 6. There were several agents outside of the Washington area. They were asked to guard and protect buildings, allegedly. They were kneeling to BLM protesters in their FBI vests. They were cheering for them. They were clapping for them. And that's not your job. Get up on your feet. You stand up and you protect the building that you've been asked to protect. You should not be making a social justice statement. You should not be applauding protesters. Some of them said, "Oh, but we were very scared. We thought that they were going to attack us." I'm sorry, but you don't look very scared to me when you're cheering and clapping and celebrating with these protesters. That's not. And then other people that were standing posted nearby buildings, no one was attacking them. No one's life was in jeopardy if they didn't kneel to these protesters. And what was disgusting is that, number one, that's a violation. You're not supposed to be making any sort of social comment or movement in your FBI ballistic vest on duty. But not only were these people not reprimanded, many of them were actually promoted to highly sought after positions. The FBI Agents Association offered them $100 gift cards. And we're like, is this for real? This can't be real. And thank goodness, under the new Trump administration, they've come in and said that's not going to be tolerated. And FBI too, they're upset, they're angry. This is not right. This is not fair. Look, they should have been held accountable years ago. Instead of being, reprimanded, then they were celebrated. And finally, what should have happened years ago is finally taking place.
And this is the story. Actually, it was a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Cash Patel fired them, all of them, some of them. What? Tell us about that.
I know that many people were removed. And they're allowed to have their own opinions. They can support the BLM protesters all they want, but not when you're on duty and you're in your FBI vest. Absolutely not. No, no way. No way.
What about the argument that they were trying to defuse a situation? It's very tense. There were riots and so on.
Like I said, there were other people that I know that were personally there, and they said that there was none of that going on. There were people standing at the building next door. There was none of that going on. And if you're in fear for your life and you really feel concerned, the last thing you're going to do is kneel, because that's not a position where you can actually act or do something. Is when you're kneeling. The other thing is when you're smiling and you're laughing and you're clapping and cheering. That's not what you look like when you're in a very high stress situation and you feel like you're potentially being threatened. It's just not, doesn't match, doesn't add up. So that was the argument that some of them used. But again, an FBI agent doesn't take an investigator to realize that's not what was happening at all.
So let's just finish on the Trump stuff, because that's another huge part of this. But it's so interesting that there's what you're chronicling here. It's just so incredibly important, and no one else has done it. I mean, this is incredibly valuable what you're doing here. On the Trump stuff, it wasn't just Comey. It was this is I mean, it just feels to me like it's just sort of in a way ancient history, but it's important that it's told, right? With the whole insurance plan and the Justice Department, the FBI together. Just talk about that a little bit and what you were aware of at the time.
Right. So again, I was working violent crime in FBI Miami, and I have a chapter 9. It's called Comey Changes the Game. I think that's a very generous title, frankly. Um, and I talk about when I realized that the FBI was political. And again, I was talking to my editor, and I said, maybe because it was a long chapter. And I said, you know what, this is so old. Like maybe it's too old, and it's like no one's going to care. And he said, no, I think it's actually not old. It's actually very relevant and it's very important because that was a defining moment for you personally and for many Americans. And it's important to detail it. Lo and behold, look what happens. I wrote this book a while ago. I wrote this before, the election even, and had these thoughts and ideas put together. It's front and center right now. This is the right time and the right moment for the release of this book because all of this is now coming to pass. All of this Arctic frost revelation, many
Yes.
people are shocked by it. I'm not shocked at all. I hate to tell you, but I am not shocked at all. Nothing there shocks me because I lived it. I saw it. But again, FBI won. We did our best to continue to do our jobs, work our cases, solve investigations, put bad people behind bars. FBI too, they went off the rails and they did. Trump became their obsession. It really did. And I hate to say this, but there's Trump derangement syndrome outside of the FBI, but there's TDS at the FBI as well. I literally heard people saying, I would love to go after Trump supporters. Like things of that sort is totally inappropriate. It's just wrong. I was in FBI Miami where the Mar-a-Lago raid took place. I did not participate in that. I was not asked to participate in that. I never participated in anything January 6th related. I was never asked to participate on anything January 6th related because you know what? I would have told them no. Not because of who it was, but because, again, you are not doing the right thing for the right reason. And if I'm going to be entrusted with this much power, the American people need to know that I am not going to abuse my power and destroy their trust.
Amazing. So, final question, Nicole. Do you think things are looking like they're on the right track now?
I do think that they're making substantial progress. I do. It's going to take a lot of time, though. People want they want a fix within 5, 6, 8 months. It took a dozen years to get into this mess. Do you think it's going to be solved overnight? That would be unrealistic. But I am hopeful. I do believe that in the end, good will win. And I do believe it is possible to create one FBI, FBI one only. So right now, Kash Patel is being tasked with obliterating and taking down FBI 2, all of the corruption and the bad things that ruined the agency, while simultaneously building up FBI 1, increasing morale, because I'll tell you, the morale was bulldozed. And I'm hearing some of these people out talking right now. I mean, I don't want to go off track, but like Goldman, Rep. Goldman's out there saying, oh, the morale of the FBI is so low. Excuse me, sir, you never actually worked there. Like, I actually worked there. I was there. I can tell you the morale was completely at an all-time low when I was at the FBI. Everything that they accuse Republicans of doing is actually what they're doing themselves. And now they're saying that the FBI is weaponized. The FBI is finally getting back on track. It's going to take time. But for someone to be held accountable for something that happened 10 years ago, that's not retribution. That's equal enforcement of the law.
Exactly. And the response, any response to what you've been saying from inside?
Very, very positive. Very positive. FBI 1, they are grateful. They're like, "Thank you. Thank you for being the voice," because you know what? It does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to walk away, but let me tell you, I have an army of friends, patriots, and colleagues who I worked with, current, retire, and they're like, "You know, Nicole, you were given this opportunity. It's not just about me. This is not about me. This is about helping this agency and helping our country." So I can tell you very positive feedback from FBI 1. FBI 2, frankly, I don't really associate with anyone from FBI 2, so I'm sure that they're talking trash, but you know what? It's not for them. It's not for them. I know one thing. At the end of the day, I report to God. And if I'm speaking the truth, that is all that matters.
Yeah, and actually, you'd hope that FBI 2 is worried because what you've done in this book, it's very clear, and why it's a must read, is basically lay out a roadmap for what needs to be addressed, and it's an incredible service you've done, and I'm sure that Cash and all the team on who are trying to do the right thing are incredibly appreciative because it
Well, I do
really
have
helps.
to add in really quick. I was very humbled and grateful that President Trump invited me to the Oval Office and personally endorsed my book. And he didn't have to do that. I think he has a respect and an honor for FBI 1. He respects our heroes and he respects the truth, which I do as well. And I'm very grateful for that endorsement.
Well, it's true because what you're doing is really important, like seriously important. And so I want to thank you as well. And thank you for joining us today. So, Nicole, just remind everyone the title and where people can get it and where they can follow
Right.
you and your
So I
work.
will show you. It's called The Two FBIs. The bravery and betrayal I saw in my time at the Bureau. You can purchase it at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Target.com, Walmart.com, or in your favorite local bookstore.
And where can people follow you?
Nicole Parker, USA.
Fantastic. Nicole, I love it. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. God bless y'all and happy holidays.
All right, everybody, that is our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. It's been a busy week on the campaign trail. Do check out on social media as I referenced there with Susan Shelley in our conversation, my reply to Tom Steyer. It was the first time I've come face to face with Tom Steyer in the governor's race. He's just entered the race. He's a billionaire climate fanatic. I think we're going to have a lot of fun on the campaign trail, holding him accountable for the damage that he's done. If you want to get involved in the campaign, we'd love you to join us. SteveHiltonForGovernor.com, and we'll see you back here for next week's episode of The Steve Hilton Show. Make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. See you soon.